friends, Dave Paulides, Can-Am Missing Project, copyrighted edition for our video channel. Thanks for being here, and this is a missing persons segment. And I've got a couple interesting cases for you today that I'll talk to you about in a second. First of all, I just came back from Kentucky. Did a conference out there called CryptidCon. And a couple of friends of mine named Lee and Jeff run it. And they did a great job. Great job. It was the largest room I've ever seen where it had vendors selling stuff. It was huge. People from all over came and sold their cryptid wear, and there was a lot of interesting stuff there. The table right next to me had my friend Travis Walton. Travis, the man who was abducted in Arizona, fascinating guy. Him and his son Luke, and I know Luke because I've met him many times before. Great young man. Had a good time. It was quite a planes, trains, and automobiles to get from the West Coast out to Kentucky, and then it was an hour drive by car, but I ended up getting there, having a good time. People were super friendly. Thank you, everybody who showed up. A man brought me a trophy from his son's hockey days. A deputy, I always like these. A deputy brought me a patch off his uniform. He and his wife stopped by, talked to me. You don't get to see all the law enforcement and parks people that come by. Sometimes they feel free to talk to me in public. Other times they ask to talk to me on the side, but there's some really, really good stories. The area out there in Kentucky has always had a lot of UFO and a lot of cryptid sightings. And every time I go back there, which is usually every other year, I'm never surprised. Never. A lot of couples were at this show, whereas at a lot of other shows there's singles. But yeah, great time. Thanks for everyone who stopped by. At that show, I talked about Bigfoot, and there were a lot of researchers there who claim that Bigfoot is an ape or a gorilla. They always call it an animal. They didn't like my presentation. In fact, they wouldn't even come over and say hi. The one guy who did that I really enjoy, Cliff Brackman. Cliff is one of the nicest people on earth. He and his wife Melissa were there. I got to say hello to them. And even though we think differently, hey, I'll always respect him and he'll always respect me, and let the differences sit where they may. But it was good. I got home, and as is usually the case, when I step back into the house, I have 400, 500, 600 special notes that I've got to respond to, people requesting this or that, needing help with this or that. And that's where I pay the price when I go away, because when you're traveling all day by air for 2 days, you can't do that stuff. And I pay the price in a heavy way. And Angie knows that after we come back for a trip, it's a good 36 hours before I can come up for air again. It's that rough. But I appreciate everyone who responded, everyone who came by. Thank you very much. Let's talk about the cases today. Very strange cases. First one happened to a man named Jacob Brandt, B-R-A-N-D-T, 47 years old. Went missing July 12, 1926 at about noon. He was a former Army officer in the Spanish-American War, and he retired as a colonel in the artillery division. See if I can find the picture, show you. This is what Jacob looked like just before he disappeared. And he was in good shape. He was an outdoorsman, a hunter, fisherman. He lived in Oakland with his wife and his daughter named Arlene. After he retired, he got a job working for Nathan Manufacturing in Oakland as a service engineer. Traveled around, supported their support services division at different parts of California. He was described as extremely trustworthy, stable, rock of the company, never had any health issues. So on July 11th, he drove from Oakland to Portola, California, and the Portola Hotel. He was going to spend the night and then on to Lawsonville on business. He was supposed to check out at noon on July 12th. This is Truckee, California, right here. And Highway 80 goes by Donner Memorial Park, and then it goes on to Reno, east of here. Highway 89 goes north. The Nevada border's right here. And he was staying in Portola up here. Got it? So at noon on July 12th, the owner of the hotel goes in to clean the room because he was supposed to be checking out, and he finds the luggage there. Someone slept in the bed, but nobody had cleaned up. So he checked the receipts again, and it showed that it was Jacob Brandt, and he was checking out that day, but he left everything behind. So he waited until about 8 o'clock that night, picked up everything in the room, put it back in the briefcase, and put it in the closet. Didn't think much about it. Happens every once in a while. Well, after he cleaned out the room, he thought that Jacob would come back sometime that day. He didn't. Fast forward a week, Jacob was supposed to be back in Oakland. And he hadn't called, he hadn't spoken to his wife, and he hadn't been home. So his wife calls Oakland Police Department and reports her husband is missing. They ask, well, where should he be? And she said, well, the first place he should have been was in Portola at the hotel. They contact the hotel. The hotel confirms they have the briefcase, confirms that he checked in the night of the 11th, and then he just disappeared. So the case was turned over to the Portola County Sheriff. I'm sorry, the Plumas County Sheriff in Portola. And at about this time, Jacob's son, Walter, who lived with his mom and dad, left for Portola. He gets there a day later, and he starts to set up with the Plumas County Sheriff about how they can start looking for their dad. Now, there was one person who said that they thought that they saw Jacob at about that same time, the 11th or the 12th, crossing a highway and then going up towards a mountain. Well, none of this makes any sense because he was a staunch businessman. He was there to just be there for one night and then move on. So how he would disappear was bizarre. But they looked around, they didn't find anything. On the 21st, the Plumas Sheriff tells Walter about a tracker that is infamous in that area and that he'd like to use them on the search. Walter says, yeah, please do. So they get a Native American tracker named Dixie Smith, who is normally employed as an Indian guide and tracker and has tracked many people over her career and always finds them. Well, they get on the track. Walter goes with them. The Plumas deputy goes with them. And they track them through the mountains. And it kind of goes in a direction south of Portola, deep into the mountains. They get about 2 or 3 miles in, and they start to lose the track, and they start to lose the ability to follow. But while they're doing this, about 2 miles in, they come across a sheep herder. They come up and they explain what they're looking for, and the sheep herder says, yeah, about a week ago, a man was walking through the woods. My sheepdog barked at him, and he ran off. And they asked him for a better description, and the man really couldn't supply it. But this was deep in the woods, a rare sighting by anybody for sure. July 24th. Both of Jacob's sons are now here. Walter, 23, Jack, 25, flew in from Chicago. They're both on scene. The boys and the mother gave an interview, and they said that their father was way too much of an outdoorsman to get lost. They said he had spent years and years in the woods, hunting, fishing, being an outdoorsman, being in the Army. He would not get lost. That was their staunch belief. Plumas County Sheriff didn't quite know what to believe at this point because he didn't quite know what was happening. The family also said that they believed that on the 24th of July that their dad was still alive somewhere, and they wanted the search to continue. Well, July 25th, they give it one more big push. There's 50 searchers in the field. The Indian guide is still out there trying to search. They're not coming up with any tracks, nothing. July 26th, 1926, Plumas County Sheriff calls off the search. They said that they covered every trail within a 5-mile radius of the hotel. They hadn't found anything. They lost the track after 2 miles going through the bush. They figured that come October, November that year, that when hunting becomes popular and that area is just inundated with hunters, that they'd find something. So that's July 26th. In a very strange turn of events, September 5th, just a couple months later, Walter, the son, is sitting in a car in front of a theater on San Pablo Avenue in Oakland. An 18-year-old person walks up, asks him for money. He says he doesn't have any, and the person shoots him in the neck. Passerby happens to see this. The suspect runs away. The passerby puts their son, puts Walter in the car and drives him to the hospital. And he barely survives. Walter said he didn't know the person. And you know, when I read this, it's like I know Oakland too well. This was in 1926. Today, Oakland is still a heaping pile of garbage in my mind. Shootings, robberies, rapes, burglaries, everything. It's horrible. It is horrible. It always has been horrible. And I didn't know that in 1926 it was still that bad, but it was bad. So Walter recovers. Now fast forward 13 months from then, fast forward 11 months from then, August 3rd, 1927. The family gets a call that a body has been found on a trail 2 miles from the Portola Hotel from a telegram operator that was hiking and found the body August 2nd. They stated that the identification on the body matched Jacob Brandt. It was highly decomposed, but they still were able to identify him. You heard that right. 2 miles from the hotel, on a trail that had been searched over many, many, many times. The Plumas County Sheriff said that the search that they conducted was the most intensive hunt at the time in California history. And the only thing that they could come up with to explain this lifetime soldier from disappearing is they said he must have had amnesia. Oh, what? Amnesia. Amnesia is not something you hear about nowadays. So what happened? Well, first of all, why would Jacob leave his hotel and just start walking through the woods? Sounds like something out of the X-Files. Remember people that would just walk to the woods and then hopefully see a UFO? I have no idea what he was doing in the woods. Maybe he left early in the morning to go into the woods and then got lost. Except the problem is, late that first day, he saw a sheep herder. If he was lost, he could have asked the sheep herder for help, but he didn't. He ran away. If that was him. If that was not him, I have no idea what happened. He was stable. He was loved by many. He had no medical issues. Nobody could figure out why he did it. Or if he did it. Nobody could confirm that the sheep herder saw him, for number one. But his body is found on a trail that had been previously searched. His tracks were lost by a professional tracker. That makes no sense either. Now, about a 3-hour drive from where Jacob disappeared is the next story. Now, Jacob disappeared in 1926 in July. This next case happened January 18th, 1933. It involves a young man named Jack Blacker. He and his parents lived in Dorrington, California, just east of the Big Trees. Now, where is that? That's a good question. Here's the map. Here's Dorrington right here. And here's Big Trees. Now, some of you may remember or know about Angels Camp, California, where they have the frog jump every year. Well, up Highway 4, you come across the Big Trees, then you come across Dorrington, Cottage Springs. This is the main route right here, one of the main routes into Yosemite. And Yosemite is very close. So from here to where the past case occurred, about a 3-hour drive. This is an area that's very thick, very rugged, lots of wildlife, and still is pretty beautiful. And yeah. So Jack Blacker lived with his parents in Dorrington, just east of Big Trees. He was described as the optimum outdoorsman for 20 years old. Was raised in the woods, knew the woods like you know your streets, was not afraid, was extremely self-confident. He had hunted and fished his whole life, but now what he was doing for a living is he was trapping. Now, if you don't know, trappers have to go into some of the most remote areas of the woods in order to get game. Sometimes it's near water sources, sometimes it's near trails, but it's remote. Well, at this time, on July 18th, 1933, he was staying at his parents' cabin near Big Trees. And he knew a lot of people around there, and they saw that he left the cabin on January 18th. And he hadn't returned by January 19th. And during that time, 30 inches of snow had fallen in that area. Now, Jack was known, and everyone knew he had set trap lines in that area around Big Trees. The day he left, he didn't have snowshoes on, and he told people that he was going to go check the mail in town and then check his lines. Now, on that January 18th date, when he left the cabin, some locals saw him, and they knew who he was and what he did, and they said, hey, the two locals, Jack Lilly and John Goldini, told Jack of fresh mountain lion tracks that they had seen. Showed him where the tracks were, and Jack said, hey, I'll set out for the lion and see what I can find. Well, all the telephones in that area late that afternoon went out because of the heavy, wet snow. Now, supposedly Jack couldn't find the tracks where they led to, and he was seen by other people getting deeper into the woods. He said he was going to check his trap lines and come back and get the mail. Well, on November 19th, he hadn't returned, and his parents had heard about it, and they came down, and they were starting a search and rescue effort to locate their son. And what they did is they made the Big Trees Hotel in Calaveras, the Big Trees Hotel in Calaveras County, in Big Trees, the base for the search and rescue. First thing they did with all the people they could muster is they checked every cabin in that area within 5 miles. Good plan. Because it had continued to snow, and it was over 4 feet of snow on the ground, and it continued to fall. The Blackers had over 50 locals assisting in trying to find Jack. And the parents were helping to organize even more people. And the hotel was serving food for the searchers, offering like the base place for everyone to come, central command, let's say. January 24th, after 5 days of intensive searching and continuing to snow, nothing was found and the search was terminated. One of the problems they had was that there was so much snow falling that people couldn't get in to help search from lower elevations, and people at the higher elevations were stuck in their home. And in fact, on January 30th, there was an article in the local newspaper that said that 5 search and rescue members were marooned at the hotel because they couldn't get out because of the large amount of snow. Now, this is 1933. Today, there's still a 2-lane highway that goes up and down that area. It's not very big. And in a big snowstorm, it would be even pretty hairy today. 1933, I can't even imagine it. I don't even know how they cleared snow way back then. But the search was over. Parents knew. And everybody knew that Mr. Blacker continued even in the snow to look for their son. At the time they terminated the search, there was 9 feet of snow in front of the hotel. Yeah. Big Trees Hotel had 9 feet of snow. It's like a 6-foot guy, 3 foot higher. When I was growing up, my folks had a cabin up in Lake Tahoe. And when we used to go up there, and my parents loved to ski, I skied since I was 6, we would go up there and sometimes we'd dig for 3 or 4 hours just to get from the street to the front door. And my dad was pretty cheap, and he knew he had cheap labor. And he and I would dig while Mom and Sis went to the store to buy stuff for the weekend. The one particular weekend I remember, we got there and it snowed all weekend, and it got all the way up to the top of the 2nd floor. There was over 15 feet of snow. It was insane. We never went skiing because the snow was too deep. We just stayed in the cabin and played games, and my dad was hoping that by Sunday afternoon the snow would let up and we could get home. But deep snow in Tahoe and in that area, it's not that uncommon. So, January 30th, essentially search and rescue's over, and people go home. Blacker still keeps searching as he can in the deep, deep snow. Fast forward 5 months, June 24th, same year, 1933. The California Conservation Corps, CCC, only works starting in the spring every year. And one of their workers happened to be in that area of Dorrington. His name was Charles Webb. And on the night of the 24th, Charles had a dream. And in that dream, he had a vision of where Jack's body was laying right now. And he could view that location in his mind. Well, Charles didn't know Jack. He had heard the stories that someone was missing in that area since he arrived. So he wakes up on the morning on June 25th. And he goes to his best friend, that he works with named Gene Zygrin. And he tells Gene, I got this vision of this guy who disappeared. And I saw where his body's at. And I'm pretty sure that I've been there before since I was here the year before. I kind of think I might know where this is. And he goes, will you go with me to see if I can find this body? And Zygrin goes, I think you're crazy, but this is interesting, so I'll go with you. June 25th, Webb and Zygrin take off on a hike on the outskirts of big trees. And they're gone for about 3 hours. And they come to an area under a big tree. And there's no branches near the bottom of the tree. It's kind of open. And they're 1 mile from the hotel that was a base camp. And they see what they think is a body, or the remnants of a body. They go up to it, and they can tell it had clothes, body had been torn apart post-death. And there were body parts strewn around 200 feet from the tree. Now, they didn't know what Jack was wearing, but they knew that they had found a body. So they go back to the hotel late that day, and they tell the hotel owner, and he calls the sheriff. The next morning, the sheriff arrives, and he gets taken back by Charles Webb to where this location was. Sheriff knew what Jack was wearing, and confirmed that was Jack's body. It was packaged up, and it was taken to the Angels Camp mortician under the belief that Jack had died from exposure, even though he was only a mile from the hotel. Nobody could quite understand that. Being a mile from the hotel, meaning he hadn't traveled much more than an hour or hour and a half from the time he was last seen, also meaning that there couldn't have been a lot of snow on the ground in that amount of time, since it didn't start snowing till late that day. Everybody was confused. But the confusing point to me, and the reason why the story's here, is, first of all, found in an area previously searched a dozen times. Cause of death, exposure. Okay. But why did Charles Webb have this dream? Why? I discussed this with someone the other day, and they gave me a different idea, a different perception about it. And they said, Dave, think about this for a second. What would happen if whoever or whatever is giving these messages out, what if they tried to give it to Zygrin 2-3 times and he just couldn't accept it? And then they gave it to Charles and it got through to him. And what I say is, let's pretend our ears are antennas. And let's say the antenna wasn't working too good for Zygrin, but the antenna was working good for Charles, and the message did get through. But who's giving the message? Why didn't Jack's family get the message? Oftentimes these dreams are had by people that aren't associated with the family. Why? And then why do some bodies have a dream associated with them getting found and others do not? And I was thinking about that and I thought, well, maybe, what if every body out there that's missing had a dream sent to someone and they had that dream? Maybe people just don't act on it. They just suppress it. They don't want to think about it. But the dream was delivered. I don't know. I think it's one of those very odd things in our world that we may never understand. But one thing I do understand, because I've talked to so many parents and family members who have lost parents, sisters, brothers, spouses, there's a huge weight that comes off the survivor's shoulders once they understand that their loved one has been found. I can't explain it. Maybe it's knowing that they can close the case. Maybe it's knowing 100% that they're deceased. Maybe it's just knowing. I don't know. One thing I do know, I'm very grateful for you being here. I'm humbled. If you could please share this video, I would be honored. If it entertained you, give it a thumbs up. I know it's Thanksgiving weekend. Sometimes people get depressed. I understand that, because I still get depressed at holidays, thinking about that. But remember, the sun's going to come up tomorrow. You're going to have a fresh slate, a fresh day. Maybe instead of trying to make yourself feel better, maybe you go out and you make somebody else feel better. Maybe you go volunteer at a shelter or soup kitchen. I've done that. It makes me feel better. Thanks for being here. Paulides out.